welcome everyone to this episode of the Miseducation of the American. I am talking today about the politics of brown communities, specifically the Latinx community, and I'm joined today by guest Hilario Dominguez. I want to make sure I got that right, but he spells it out phonetically, so I got it. And Hilario is a community activist. He's an educator. He's someone who has run for office within the community in which he lives in Chicago, and that in and of itself should gain him a medal. And he is someone that we will definitely learn from on this topic. So I'm excited to welcome Hilario to our episode today. Thanks so much.
On campaigns. I've worked on Chuy Garcia's congressional campaign, volunteered way back in his mayoral campaign. Alma Anaya, who's a Cook County commissioner here in the area, out on Northeast, who's also state rep, who took out a long-term dynasty member, one of the Burks. So
Wow.
Ed Burke's brother in the state legislature took him out. So I've been a part of many different campaigns. Progressive campaigns, and even ran my own for alderman of the 25th Ward back during the 2019 municipal cycle. So I've done some work in Chicago politics and just continue to be involved as much as I can as far as being in the progressive spaces and really trying to push our city and our politics left.
Yeah. So and we know the Chicago politics is its own kind of monster.
Oh man. I didn't realize this. So I went to school in Baltimore and often spent time in DC. And this was before I was really politically involved here in Chicago. I was working for a councilman in Baltimore. So I did a lot of political work in the East Coast, and would often hear things like, "Oh, you're from Chicago, man. Politics out there is different." And I really had no idea because at that time I was in college, still didn't spend that much time in politics in Chicago. So I've always known, that's one of the reasons why they call our city the Windy City, but never really experienced it for myself. But yeah, Chicago politics is a monster in and of itself, for sure.
So what's something that you learned? You ran for a political office. I really want to talk about kind of the genesis of that. But what was something that you learned when running for office that kind of changed your perspective on life, politics, and people?
Yeah, I think one of the largest lessons now that I've been able to reflect on it for nearly 2 years since we first launched our campaign was to really hold steadfast in your why. It's really easy for so many other things to change, but the why should always remain the same. It should stay consistent. And that moment that it starts to waver is when you'll truly start to see like everything else kind of falter. And I can reflect back on the campaign and see the moments where I lost track of my why and made decisions, made movements that ultimately affected it and impacted the result of the campaign, but really just stayed with me, right? And those kind of things stick with you, where you're like, if I were to ever do that again, or if I were to help anyone, this is what I would tell them. So that would be the main thing I tell anyone that I talk to, that I've spoken with about running, is to remember your why, hold steadfast there, and hold on for dear life, because it's one hell of a ride.
Yeah. So what was your why? What was
Mm.
your why at the same at the beginning as it was at the end, or did it shift throughout? Or should you? I guess you're saying it shouldn't have shifted, huh?
Yeah, so my why stood the same, but it got foggy. Things got in the way. My why was always um, my family and the people in my community, and that was why I was doing it. Right. I grew up in the neighborhood during a time where Danny Solis was alderman. A lot of people know him now because of the federal investigation that he's under, and that whole huge scandal. And so one of my actual first experiences that I didn't tell a lot of people this, but My mom, I grew up in an alcoholic household. My dad was an alcoholic very long time and domestically abusive. And I remember going with my mom to, well, I believe at that time, the alderman's office, who was Dan Solis. My mom asking for help, out of fear because it was also very hard for her to ask for help. And her kind of being pushed out the door, right? And given an option. It was like, we're to call the cops or you just have to get out. And I remember her not wanting to call the cops. She loved my dad, didn't want to take that route. Um, but was essentially pushed out the door. And I just remember my mom being really sad about that, really hurt. And that kind of, for me, I was like, I'm gonna take this dude out one day. Like, that isn't cool. Like, how does someone get in a position like this and treat people that way? Right. And so for me, that was very personal. And kind of centered my work unconsciously and consciously around caring for people and fighting for people, especially people who are often victims to systems that they don't know how to navigate. Right? Both of my parents are immigrants from Mexico. And so I often worked as a translator for my mom from a very young age. She spoke English, but the translation piece wasn't necessarily the language, it was the understanding of the system, right? People would say things to her and she had no idea. To this day she's like, what does this mean? What do I do? And so for me it was, that isn't right and we need to break that down for people, right? And that was my why, was I know how this feels. I've lived this, I've seen this. I don't want anyone else to experience this. I want to be someone who can help break this down for people, break down these systems that often take advantage of our folk just because they don't know, right? Just because they don't know what's happening. Very purposefully, by the way. But that was my why, was to truly break down those systems to make it accessible for our people.
Do you still think, because actually it's so, isn't it crazy how like lives mirror one another? Because my I grew up on the south side of Chicago, far
Mhm.
east side,
Yeah.
and my mother went to our Alderman Beavers, for help when our family was struggling.
Hmm.
And actually he did help.
Wow.
And because of his help, she organized and fought for him. Now we know the scandal that has subsequently caught up to him,
Sure.
but like she fought like heck for him because, and I just remember her traipsing us around neighborhoods and knocking on doors, probably at a time where we shouldn't have been knocking on anybody's door, Lardo. It wasn't necessarily a space where you wanted to come up
Yeah.
and knock on the wrong door, but like knocking on doors to ensure that somebody who had helped her stayed in office. So that's
Mhm.
really interesting that those, like that dynamic exists. Like you go to someone for help, and if they help you, then you are forever, endeared. Or they don't help you, and you think, wait a minute, this system is not working truly for me. Do you still think that our political system in Chicago, especially the way the wards are organized, still lacks empathy and humanity to a certain extent?
Hands down, hands down. And you'll see it, look no further than the policies that we pass or the policies that we don't pass. Right? There were policies on the table during this last legislative cycle in city council when the mayor passed the budget, that was pushing for a corporate head tax to tax large logistic companies like Amazon, right? An employee tax. And this would have raised money that the city desperately needed, right? But instead, we decided to do different things like raise property taxes or decrease the speed limit on cameras so that, it's stricter, right? And we all know where most of those cameras are, black and brown neighborhoods, right? So look no further than the policies that we pass. And this is why it's really important to have representation in office. And when I say representation, I don't want to like mislead people, because oftentimes people, black and brown people, will say like, oh, we need more brown people, we need more black people in office. But all skin folk and kinfolk, right? It's not enough to have another Latinx person in office. Right? We have to push for people that actually understand our situations, that empathize with us, that are from us, right? And that will continue to fight. with us and for us. And when they don't, that's when we as people stay organized to hold their feet to the fire. Right. So
Exactly. And I think there's been this larger conversation about the disenfranchisement of like people of color in the democratic process. And I often think that I think that's a misnomer because I think that we discount the democratic process for me has levels and layers. And so I look and I see people in the neighborhood that I'm from and even that my family extended to, and I see advocates, I see community organizers, and while we may look at the number of registered voters as part of the democratic process, I think we need to expand that view and expand that narrative. I think that's a really false narrative. Do you see that? Do you hear that same kind of rhetoric out in brown communities as well?
yeah, I mean, this last election cycle, right? This idea of like activating the sleeping giant is always what they like to say in the press when they refer to the brown vote, the Latinx vote, right? And how are we going to activate the sleeping giant? How are we going to get more Latinx people out to vote? Well, we saw that in huge waves this last election cycle. Latinx people came out and voted, right? Brown people came out to vote. Organizations like Mi Gente in Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, they were winning these states in coalition with other orgs because they focused on getting Latinx people out to vote, right? And historically disenfranchised people out to vote. But as far as Latinx people are concerned, and this is like where I can speak a lot to, and I'm sure there's similarities amongst other voting populations, we are not a monolith, right? Like to say that the sleeping giant is all going to vote blue or red is wrong. We're a spectrum, right? I mean, unfortunately for someone like me who voted blue, the sleeping giant came out to vote in Miami, right? And the Cuban Americans came out to vote, but they voted red.
Yep.
Right. So we have to stay organized, stay active and engaged because this takes work. We have to make those conversations, have those conversations at the door where we're letting people know what's happening, right? And really informing them so they can make the best decision. And ultimately, we hope they can make a decision that is in the interest of our people, disenfranchised people.
So a couple of questions stem off of what you said. What are your thoughts about how the media and politicians then characterize the Latinx vote in this last election cycle? Because quite frankly, there were some media outlets and some politicians that really downplayed some of the, I know, and there was obviously there was a lot of conversation about Black women voters because they did come out in large numbers. But I felt like there was this kind of, I don't know, there were these different layered conversation about the Latinx vote. And I don't feel like Latinx people got the due that they deserved for like coming out in huge numbers. I feel like there was just too many different conversations going on that kind of took away from the main message that we did show up and we showed out.
Yeah. You know, I'm really tired of Black and brown people having to save racist white America.
We'll say it again for the people in the back.
Yeah, and shout out Black women because I could only imagine how tired you all are to have to put us on your backs constantly, right? You get nothing. You're always last in conversations. And yet you all came out in droves to help get Donald Trump out of office, right? So I just want to say, first, start off with that. We need to thank Black women. We don't do it often enough. We need to do it more, and we need to start our conversations with that. One. Two, we have to stop waiting to thank Black, brown people post elections when we come out to save racist white America. I'm tired of it. We need to meet us constantly at the door. We need the things that our communities have been struggling for: food, homes. We need these things in order to survive, and that's what we need to start getting, right? So all these electeds that we're continuously voting into office, we need to hold their feet to the fire to finally pass legislation that's going to give us this, or get them out, right? Like that's where I think the squad, young people like the squad, and even older people like Bernie, who really started this and
Yep.
really paved the way for a lot of people. And that's where we're moving, right? It's to stop being apologetic, to stop compromising and accepting the little, and really dream big and talk big and reach for that and move that way, right? And I know,
I'm so sick of lip service. Like,
yeah,
if we know that these systems exist, then let's talk about how we dismantle these systems, and not just talk about them every 4 years or every 2 years when it's convenient for you, but show me in your actions what's
right.
possible.
And for us as people to stop counting on electeds to do that, right? Like we got us. Um, I keep saying that the reason why I was so excited to get Biden into office is because I want to fight against him.
Mhm.
I want to organize him,
Mhm.
right? I mean, like he's not even in office yet. He's just the elect, and he's already. I mean, we have to look at who's he putting in his cabinet, right? And a lot of people are sort of losing track of that. But there are people that he's putting in his cabinet that are no good. There are some awesome picks, but that we as a movement have to organize by putting up our slate and saying these are the people that we want in your cabinet, right? We want Bernie in labor. We want Elizabeth Warren as treasurer. Whoever it is that the movement says like these are who our interests align behind, and these are who we want in your office. That's how we have to stay all the time. We got to continue to organize just constantly. We had a little rest. Resting is, you know what I'm saying? Resting is powerful too, and it's political. But if you good, you took your rest, it's time to keep going.
Yeah. And I think that I think because the past 4 years have been traumatic,
Yeah.
to say the least, that some people feel like, well, give it a chance, right? This give it a chance narrative. Well, give them a chance, and that's not what the process is, though. The process is, when we look at it as a true process, and I think the last 4 years are just this blip in history that are not at all the true process. That we should be questioning and pushing and advocating for our specific needs. And so I think that what the last 4 years have done is just like, oh, let's just breathe in normalcy. No, let's not breathe in normalcy. Let's still push. Let's still push.
Yes, exactly. It's time to keep fighting, right? And I mean, this idea of that young people are stepping up to me is so inspiring and also motivating, right? Like defund the police movement, that slogan, defund the police, has rocked our nation, right? You have President Obama talking about it. Now everyone's like, wait, did he go too far? Did he not go too far? And I'm sitting back and loving it because I'm like, if we didn't organize and even say defund the police, we
Yep.
wouldn't be having this conversation. But the fact
Exactly.
that we're having this conversation is because young people came out in droves and pressured electeds and pressured our nation to move that way, right? And we'll only continue to move that way and have those conversations if we continue to fight and organize.
Well, it's clear that you're a community organizer at heart, and I know that you led a Unity March earlier this summer, and it really was a wonderful display of unity in the community. What do you think is the genesis of the tension between the Black and Brown communities? And we know that our collective voice and agency is powerful, but how do we get to this point of true unity as a people, as we organize that way?
Yeah. Again, I gotta start that answer off with shouting out the femmes, the Latinx women that were really put that together. We're in the front lines, and really brought uh, all those people together to march through our neighborhoods and say boldly, loudly, um, that we are Black Lives Matter. We will not stand for anti-Blackness that exists within the Latinx communities. And we are here in support, right? So shout out to all of them, to those organizations, to those individuals that took up that mantle. And I was just so lucky to be able to support them in that. But as far as unity is concerned, um, I really think about it from an organizing standpoint, right? And as organizers, when we're building coalitions, when we're coming together with other people, we always ask ourselves, what is our common interest, right? So there's that old saying, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests, right? And so if we can align our interests, then that's where we can start. That's a starting point because there's so many things to break down. Listen, as a Latinx person, I'm not going to sit here and act like there's not anti-Blackness that exists in our culture. There's not anti-Blackness that I've had to face and break down and really say like, oh, wow, that's rooted in me, right? Like because of these systems in my culture, because of these things, these traditions that have existed. So I've had to reflect and do some real hard work and still have to reflect on breaking that down daily, right? So recognizing that there's all that history and trauma that as a Latinx male, cisgender male, I carry, I have to recognize that at least to find that starting point, right? And that's aligning the interest in organizing. What is it that we both share in common, and how can we grow from there? And start building the relationship to have those difficult conversations that we need to have to better understand each other and authentically be in relationship with each other.
And I think people don't understand truly that what benefits Black and Brown communities really is going to touch and benefit everybody. So when you do something, when you put a policy in place that touches Black and Brown communities, it's going to touch everyone anyway. But quite frankly, you want a rising tide lifts all boats, and you want to be that rising tide for all of us. Um, so it's not in the. Sometimes I think when white folks hear that, they get a little intimidated, and it's not policy that is going to be exclusive. It's policy that is targeted toward us, but that everybody is going to benefit from. Not that everyone should be in need of benefit of it, but I think we just look holistically at it. You said something earlier just about the Latinx community not being a monolith, and I can completely relate to that statement. But there are some issues that are uniquely your own, just like the Black community has issues that are uniquely our own. What are some of those concerns that you feel like haven't necessarily been mentioned or adequately addressed?
See, that's interesting. So I don't know if I would agree that there are issues that are uniquely ours. I think there are issues that America has uniquely made ours, right? The one being immigration. But also, I'll tell you this: when I was in East Coast in Baltimore, um, there were a large amount of Black immigrants, African immigrants, Haitian immigrants, so many different immigrants that were of different skin tones. That to me, that really opened my eyes, right? Because I was like, immigration is not a Latinx issue.
Yeah.
America loves to make it a Latinx issue, right? But that, to me, I think is an issue that impacts a lot of people. I mean, there are a large number of immigrants, undocumented immigrants in the Upper East side of our country, right? From, I believe, Eastern and Western Europe. People that from Poland, Czech descent, so many different types of immigrants up there, but they're often left out of the conversation because when we think of immigration, that issue, we think brown people,
Yep.
right? I mean, if you're the president, you think bad hombres. And so to me, when I think about the issues that impact my community, that's where I try to find unity because those are the starting points, the common interest with different communities that I share. For instance, being raised in Pilsen, before it was gentrified Pilsen, an issue that was really prevalent in my life was gang violence, gun violence, domestic abuse, right? To me, those were issues that I thought were unique to people that looked like me. I was like, oh, that's what we go through. obviously, as I'm learning and I met people, I'm like, those are issues that are unique to my family or even my neighborhood, right? Those are other people from around the city, from around the world, from around the country face those same issues. And how do we align ourselves um, to combat those issues, right? So when I saw the death of George Floyd, when I seen the tragic death of so many other Black men and women that have been gunned down by police, I also see the brown men and women that have been gunned down, right? And I say, yeah, I know how that feels. And that's how I can get behind that, right? Recognizing that there's no need for me to also say, oh, but brown lives matter too, right? Because I recognize that if Black lives don't matter, no one's life matters, and that definitely not all lives matter. Um, so for me, I'm like, oh, I just know how that feels, so I can empathize with that, and now I can align my interest in there and connect with them and ally in there authentically versus allying in there because of whatever else.
That is a really good. You really challenged my thinking where that's concerned, because even as you identified those things that you were concerned about, those are the very same things that I was concerned about. And I loved your reframing of the issue as something that is not our issue but is a systemic issue, because it doesn't mean that we have to be fixed, it means that the system has to be fixed.
Right.
So thank you for giving me that just renewed perspective in and of itself, just to think about that.
Yeah.
It um thinking of like local, thinking about local, because I know that so many of us have like been so caught up into the president and this big election, but my mother always taught me that local elections were much more important than those 4-year presidential elections, and we see that now in Georgia even.
Yeah.
Why do you think people misunderstand how pivotal and essential local elections are?
Um, because it's easy to see the big stuff. It's easy to see the national news, right? And that's really all that is in our face, right? The presidency. I mean, these are things that historically has been ingrained in our country, right? Sort of federal policies, federal news, the bigger picture things. That's the stuff that the media has made sexy, right? Quote unquote, but you often don't get that same kind of coverage or that type of tradition when we're talking about our local elections or local politics, which is the fight here. Like we you know as far as the work that I do with local organizations here within my union and other organizations is how do we organize our people and educate our people around the things that are happening in their very backyard, um, right? You'll be surprised to hear, or maybe not surprised to hear, how many people don't know about the budget that passed, right? And how that's going to impact them on their property taxes, or how that's going to impact them just in their daily lives, right? The fact that, instead of 6 miles over, if they're only 4 miles over this time on a speed limit, they're going to get a ticket. And just those things are really important for us to educate our people on. And frankly, not a lot of people are aware of local politics and local policies. But that's where the change is, right? And I think that's what you're alluding to. That's where we
Absolutely.
can directly see our impact. For instance, Rosana Rodriguez, who's a left progressive alderman who was elected in the 2019 municipal election, won by less than 20 votes, right? Like, these are, when we say your vote matters in terms of city politics, it really does, right? And local politics. I mean, Lauren Underwood, who flipped a district here, flipped and blue in Illinois, almost. I mean, she almost lost her seat. That was a pretty contentious race. She won within a very small margin, and that's because people went out and worked hard for her. But I mean, if we lose a congressional seat, right, that's one less blue seat that we have in the House and brings us closer to losing our majority there. So this is why local elections is really important. I would even argue more important than federal.
I would completely agree with that. I think even you talk about young.
House and brings us closer to losing our majority there.
Wow,
So this is why
can you hear
local
that?
elections is really
Yeah,
yeah, I think it was that was something
okay.
important that the
Yeah,
universe wanted us to hear.
exactly, exactly. You're playing doubly here. Um, I think that even just and I think it goes back to my comment earlier about just like the democratic process being layered and thinking about like people not realizing that even like going to your school council meetings is important because that's what's going to touch you ultimately. And like going to things within your community that can promote change. You talked earlier about all folk and kinfolk. And so that actually started me to think too about what do you think about this idea that our political spectrum should be equally representative of our electorate?
Yeah,
I
I
know.
think yeah, I think there's two important things to make there. The first is that the fact remains there aren't enough black and brown folk in office. There aren't enough women in office. There aren't enough trans people in office. Um, there aren't enough, right? And so that's one, and that remains true. Yes, and it's an and, not a but, because it can live together. It's not enough to just fight for um, skin representation. It's not enough. It's not enough to have someone that identifies like me. We have to make sure that they actually will fight for our for the things that we need to survive, right? So that's what I meant by all skin folk and kinfolk. And I love what our union's vice president says is to ask where they're from. Who are they coming with? Where have they worked? Right? No one wants anyone who no one sent. Right? That's a popular saying in Chicago. No one wants nobody no one sent.
That's good. I don't think I've ever heard that one.
Yeah. So that was I think a pretty old classic saying in Chicago. But when we think about our mayor, that is, I guess, in the epitome of representation. Like that's it, right? A black woman who identifies as part of the LGBTQ community, right? But
Thank you.
you then think about the policies she's pushing for or where she came from,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Then you really start to say, like, yeah, maybe that's not the best option. And you see what she's done and the things that since she's been elected, the policies that she's passed, right? They're not in the interest of poor black and brown people, right? They're actually hurting us.
Yes.
A lot of people would argue that they're worse. Some of her policies are worse than Rom's. So we really have to ask ourselves when we're elevating and supporting people, what have they done? Like what do they bring to the table? Where have they been? Where have they worked? Where have they put their boots on the ground in? Right. And I think that's the next like evaluation piece. It's like, okay, yes, they represent us, they look like us. Okay, now let's ask those questions.
How do you get people to be engaged enough to start asking those questions? Or is it not even a matter of engagement as much as it is like like um I don't know. I feel like during the time of Obama's campaign, there was this I didn't nobody had to ask me to get engaged. There was this momentum and feeling that I wanted to engage in myself.
Right.
So um what do you think about the juxtaposition of those two?
Yeah, I think that was I think that's why it was such a momentous and historical moment. Just everyone felt that sort of atmosphere, right? It was in the air almost. It was palpable that people wanted to be a part of this change, right? His slogan, change, hope, right? But I also think that the that's the exception, right? And not the common. And I think the reality is that it takes a lot of hard work. And that million question of like, how do we do it? Um, I don't think that the solution is complex. I think it's fairly simple. To me, I always say relationships.
Mm.
Got to build as many relationships as you can, which is why organizing doesn't start during an election cycle. It shouldn't. It needs to start before that, and it needs to be continuous and engaging and consistent and constant, right? Because relationships take long to build. Real, authentic relationships, that's not just an exchange. That's not just, a Chicago way of like, hey, I'll fix your alley and I'll count on your vote. But a real, authentic relationship that, like, hey, that's Miss Tammy and she has 3 kids and 2 of them are in college. And, now you're building with her and you know what she needs and you can connect with them because you all have had those conversations. Those take time. But that's where the authentic change comes from. Right? That's where you really can connect with people and you can really drive change, and build coalition and community and add to the movement that is, revolutionary, I guess.
And it's interesting. Just even in those comments, I hear what they've been doing in Georgia. So
Yeah.
I've been listening to these women who have said we've been on the ground there for years. We have been talking to community organizers. We have been partnering with community organizations and developing that relationship. So that rings true there, and why we see the result, and hopefully we'll see even a similar result in January, come January. I was going to ask you. There's all of these like different things going around, statements, and I wanted to ask you what you believe. So there's this been I've been watching MSNBC a lot, and they said our democracy is in jeopardy.
Yeah.
Do you believe that's hyperbole?
You know what? I'm going to say no, but I'm also going to say that, our democracy has been in jeopardy,
Mhm.
right? But because now it's an election and now Georgia is really important and Georgia is sexy and all eyes are on Georgia, um, then those saying those kinds of things obviously will get people attention. But I'll tell you that Black and Brown people believe that we haven't lived in a democracy for a very long time. We'll tell you that our democracy has been in jeopardy, right? We'll tell you that our voice hasn't mattered for a very long time. So when I hear that kind of thing, I'm like, sure, I guess, yeah. We've lived that though. We've seen that, right? Like when, we've had to stand in line for welfare, right? Or how we've seen our parents lose their homes or lose their jobs, especially now during a pandemic. Or we've seen that. We've lived that. We we get that. Um, and so for me, I say like, yeah. Um, and if we win, if we don't win, Black and Brown people are going to continue to fight like hell because that's what we do. We survive. We fight always, right? Like, um, I was thinking about. So I'm a teacher and I did teaching through Teach for America, which is a whole conversation in and of itself. But I was thinking the other day about how one of the big things that they pushed for, I remember learning, was like, you gotta teach your kids about grit and like install grit in your kids,
We
right?
got grit. We were born with grit.
That's what I'm saying. And that's what I mean about our democracy. We've been fighting, right? Like we've been feeling that our democracy is in jeopardy. So I don't think it's hyperbole, but I also think that it's not news.
Yeah. Do you think we ever existed? Do you think democracy has ever been a thing for us? Like I think about that term, and if democracy is for the people, so I'm history teacher too.
Yeah,
So thinking
yeah,
about that, democracy is for the people. Well, if I think back in my history, where's the for my people? Like I
right.
don't know if
For
I
who
ever
people?
existed in a democracy.
Right. For which people? Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
exactly. So
Yeah. We've been left out of that conversation for a very long time, right? And like, to the point that we were talking about earlier, um, despite us being left out, Black and Brown people have continued to save our democracy,
yeah.
continue to save, racist white America, right? Again, gotta shout out Black women because y'all keep doing it, and they continue to leave y'all last in conversations.
They also keep saying, that in the next election cycle, the minority will be the majority. And what will that mean for the next presidential election cycle? What do you think? What do you think that means over the next 4 years as the global majority also becomes the national majority?
Yeah, hello somebody. I we're not a minority. We haven't been a minority for a very
I
long
hate that word. That's like,
we haven't been a minority in a very long time. This system though doesn't serve us. So, as we continue to ask questions about like how do we get more people to vote, we're really saying like how can we continue to reach out to black and brown people and add them into a system that has never served them, that was never for them, right? So my question is, or my response to that is always, well, how can we tear down the system that is rotten and build one while we continue to include and reach out to the senoras and senores in our neighborhoods, to the black and brown people that haven't been listened to.
absolutely. So I have some questions for you, my rapid fire questions towards the end
Do it.
here. What are you reading or what do you suggest that we read?
Okay, quickly, a point of clarification. Am I quickly saying my answers?
No,
Like,
you don't have to. You can go on as long as you want to.
all right, word. So I actually prefer audiobooks. It's my way of learning. Um, so what I'm listening to right now is I went through all the Harry Potter books because the narrator is bomb. And
Really?
yeah, it's the narrators in for the audiobooks for Harry Potter are just so entertaining. It's just all in a British accent and it just makes makes
Makes
so
it
much
better,
more.
elevated. Because I'm now an Audible girl. I'm
Yeah,
love
yeah.
Audible reading, but the narrator can mess up a book.
Exactly, exactly. So I was listening to all of that. I am listening to uh, I don't want to say his name, it's free publicity, but I am listening to Obama's new book. Um, it's very long, but it is in his voice, so it's a little easier to listen to.
That
Um,
wasn't a ringing endorsement, Hilario. That was like, you're like, it's time. It's
it's
red.
cool. It's good. There's some gems in there. So I'm listening to that. So yeah, I have a couple books that I got on the Audible list right now.
Cool. What is something that you yourself want to unlearn?
Okay, as a cisgender male, I continue to unlearn a lot of things. Primarily around male toxicity, specifically in Latinx culture, we have what we call it machismo, and so I'm consistently trying to reflect on the machista that lives in me and that I, exude in my everyday. So right now I'm unlearning a lot about my anger and dealing with my anger and how that comes out in different ways, either aggressively or passive aggressively, and how I can not get rid of that one but appreciate that one because that one served me at some point in my life, but also be able to say like, hey, I actually don't need you right now and I need someone else. I need to tap into another side.
You're second in a row male who said that that's what they're trying to unlearn.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and shout out to the femme movement that has consistently brought that up, right? And that goes back to the conversation we're bringing up. If it's not for the movements bringing these conversations up, we'll never have them. We'll never reflect and learn from them.
Thanks for that one. What's your hope for the world?
My hope is that we, thinking from an abolitionist framework, where we can come to a point where we're having more conversations, tough conversations, and less like cancelings. I think it's easy to critique. It's getting easy to critique and to have negative feedback about things. I think the real work lies in being able to talk and to resolve things through conversation and discourse and dialogue, and sometimes also being able to be okay with disagreeing. And so I think that's my hope right now, is as we are in this um, stage where everyone is paying attention to everything, because frankly we have the time to,
Exactly.
right? How can we really push ourselves to have those conversations, those real tough conversations that get us to a better place of learning than just recognizing harm and then canceling things out because of it.
Yeah, because cancel culture stops, right? And
Mhm.
after there's nothing else. There's no dialogue, there's no evolution, there's no growth that
Right.
comes from that. Where
Yeah.
do you think we go from here? We've had a tough year. 2020 has been
Man, it's interesting because I think it's forced everyone to sort of take an inner look, right? And some people haven't been able to um, address those things that they're seeing. Some Everyone deals with it differently, but everyone has had to take an inner look, right? Whether we like have moved our head from it or not, we've had to reflect on ourselves and personally and as a society. So I think we're at this point where we've identified a lot of harm, a lot of toxic places in our lives personally and also as a society. Now I'm hoping, along with what my hope is, I think we should start heading towards that place of what's next. How do we, now that we've identified that, how can we now heal from that? Um, and we don't have to do it together. That's the beautiful part. We can do it together, right? And so that's kind of where my thinking is. How do we start creating those spaces where we can heal and grow and learn, continue to prosper?
will you run for office again?
Ooh, uh, great question. My partner says no. Now my fiance says no. Um, but I say if people that I organize with in the community, if they ask me to, right, then I'll have to take a harder look at that and reflect on that. But
Yeah,
as it
send
stands
for
right,
you. So if they send for you, it goes
if
back to that.
exactly, if people send for me, right, because I don't want to be nobody sent,
Yeah.
right. But if people are tapping me and are saying like, we believe in you, we trust you, we want to stand behind you, then I'll have to take a harder look. But as it stands right now, I am focusing on on the classroom and really just taking those inner looks, right, and figuring out how can I grow from it.
So okay, I know I'm deviating from my life
Rapid
question.
rapid fire.
Yeah, because I remember your fiance telling me how hard that process was and
Mhm.
just how messy that became. What inspires you like that to even want to go back into a process that caused that much um,
Mhm.
just mess has to be like you have to have a fortified spirit for that. Like where where do you get energy to even think about doing that again?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because it putting anyone who runs, anyone, really puts themselves out there um, in a way that is hard for most people to understand unless you have put yourself out there in a similar way. So it was very uh, you have no clue how hard it is until you come out of it. It was very difficult, and healing from it has been very difficult, right? And the healing process is still continuing, um, but ultimately, I think people who run and their why is based in community. I think that's what keeps them going, right? For me, that's what gives me my skin. Is if I do this work authentically, if I'm doing this work, um, how I think is uh, the right way, then people will have my back, right? And that's what will keep me going. Is people having my back, people believing in me, supporting me. Um, that's what to me keeps my mind open to that opportunity, right? But only if people support me and people send for me, right? Because otherwise, then it becomes, to me, I think more of an ego thing, and um, I think you lose your why that way.
Yeah.
And that's when I think you have electeds that can easily sway and not steadfast. Because I'll tell you what, running for office is hard.
Mm.
Being in office is even harder. Right? Once you're in office and have to make decisions, hard decisions, you're going to get critiqued even harder. Right? So I
Those
always,
decisions, do you think that sometimes those, I've been like just hearing people and even hearing like AOC, sometimes those decisions are not even your decisions. Those decisions are the people's decisions that you're making on their behalf. So it might not even be something that you're like, well, I would normally choose A, but I'm not choosing for myself. I'm choosing for the people behind me who have put me here, and so I'm going to choose B. And I think that's hard. I think that's why so many politicians lose their way.
yeah, yeah. And at the end of the day, I think what has to be in the back of your mind is not that you're a politician, but that you're a public servant, and really dive deep and connect with that,
Yeah.
right? Because if you start saying that, okay, well, my purpose is to serve the people, whether that's something that I personally want to do or not, right? Then you'll be loyal and also steadfast to your why, and you continue to have those people that will have your back when it gets messy, when it gets hard, and when it gets dirty, right? I mean, that's why AOC won her reelection and the squad won their reelection, is because they continue to make decisions in the interest of the people, and people had their back.
Yeah.
Right?
And they stay connected to those people.
Exactly.
They stay connected to the people. Where AOC just did a study about the people who lost, the Democrats who lost their races were ones who had not been on social media, who had not connected with their base. And I wish more people would just listen to the young people that are.
Listen to the kids, man.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that I've had to reflect on. It's been really hard, is to recognize that I'm no longer considered youth. You know, that came and went.
It's a hard pill to swallow.
It was a hard pill to swallow, because for a very long time I'm like, I'm youth, and now I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not the youth. Yeah, and the youth, quite frankly, have a lot of things. They differ in a lot of things than when I was considered youth, which isn't even that long ago, right? It was like 5 years ago that I was still considered youth, and now people are like, yeah, dude, you're disconnected. Yeah. So I'm like, all right, cool.
Yes. Even the music I listen to, I'm like, oh, I'm okay, I'm there.
Yeah. I read something the other day that was, I think a high schooler wrote something along the lines in a paper that was like, in the late 1900s. And I had to like reread that a couple of times. I was like, what? Late 1900s?
Wow.
That's a thing?
Wow. Oh, I asked my students to pick which Prince gift they were, and they were like, Prince? I was like, no, I have just totally dated myself. And I'm like, how do y'all not know Prince? And they were like, we don't know Prince. And I was like, oh, wow.
See? Wow. Something's really wrong. That's when you know something's wrong.
Yes. Well, and I think it's more wrong with me than them. How can people reach you if they want to know more about you and support you in your run, if that's what the people call you to do, or just follow your activist moves?
For sure. Facebook, Instagram. My Facebook name, Hilario Dominguez. Instagram name is my name phonetically spelled, ee.la.dio. But yeah, that's how I keep in touch with the world and share what's happening. Mainly sharing what's happening in the community and trying to get people, in tune and active.
Well, I appreciate your voice. I appreciate you spending time with me today. And I just want to end by saying congratulations.
Thank you.
On your engagement to
Thank you very much.
That hot chick that you are engaged to. So
lucky man.
You are. You're both pretty lucky. So thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a
All
good
right.